Quick question. In an apocalyptic survival scenario, would you rather have a reckless but overpowered ally, or a cautious, strategic ally who isn't very strong? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. Our story begins with some killer lore about the world. Humans fucked around with global warming and quickly found out. Sea levels rose, and continents sank one after another. Prosperous civilizations, the otaku lifestyle, and of course the hunt for Huz were no more. Humanity declined, and the world fell to ruin. Well, everything except marine life. For some reason, the creatures of the depths flourished, mutated, and eventually became the undisputed, horrifying kings of the world. Shifting scenes, we're introduced to an all-too-familiar ruined city and the main characters of our tragic tale. Under the watching eyes of the fishies and the once majestic cityscape, a duo of primal hunters make their entrance, the kid Bota and his unnamed father, who shall henceforth be addressed as Poppy, unpervertedly, of course. As expected of a father-son duo, the father is overly cautious, always warning his son to be careful. Bota, on the other hand, does his rebellious thing and tells his father to get off his back. He's always careful, so Poppy should stop nagging already. After bickering for a while, they finally make it to their targeted destination, a ruined Quick Mart. As expected from a relic of the past, the place is a dump, but it still holds treasures valuable to the destitute duo. Treasures quickly noticed by the observant Bota, a shit ton of canned food. Like a junkie getting his fix, Bota crashes out and starts stocking their cart. He takes everything, even the ones he struggles to recognize. Realizing Bota is struggling with his reading, and by extension, identifying the cans, Poppy calls him out, accusing him of neglecting his studies. Bota claps back, saying it's pointless. The world's already ruined, so when would he ever need that knowledge? Though saddened by the truth in his words, Poppy holds his ground, insisting it isn't pointless. He advises Bota to hit the books anyway. Just because it seems useless now doesn't mean it'll stay that way forever. Who knows when knowledge might come in handy? Bota says bet, and nods in reluctant understanding. He'll hit the books, so can Poppy stop nagging already? But boring topics aside, why was Poppy scavenging more forks? Didn't they already have enough at home? Or was this some fetish? Maybe freaky Poseidon Trident cosplay shit? What a horny dog. Poppy sighs and explains Bota's got it all wrong. He's just being cautious. Like he said, who knows when such things will come in handy? Better to collect now than regret later. Either way, they're about done, so it's time to get the hell out. Bota nods, and the duo hop onto the cart. Poppy pulls a lever, releasing the lifting bags. With their help, the duo float out of the city, leaving the ominous ruin behind. As they do, Bota reflects on the scenery from his perspective as a kid born after the fall. He's heard countless stories about the cities, how majestic and full of life they once were. But to him, they don't seem that grand. Just worn-out ruins, gloomy and hiding unspeakable horrors. He quickly casts his gaze away, leaving the underwater terror behind. After a bit more floating, the bags break the ocean surface, carrying the duo topside. They emerge close to a rundown fishing boat, their home in this apocalyptic world. Realizing they're back, the third member of the family, and another main character, calls out in delight. She reports the result of her scouting. Nothing of note. Poppy is disappointed but hides it from the kids. The real issue is clear. Nothing of note means no land masses or safe places to dock nearby. It also means they'll have to keep drifting at sea indefinitely. Picking up on this, Bota asks if they'll ever meet other survivors. Poppy has always told them stories, but Bota can't help wondering if they're the only ones left alive. Lita, the little sister, chimes in too. Were they really the last ones? Had everyone else already joined their mother in heaven? Poppy smiles sadly and comforts them. He insists there are survivors out there, but the ocean is vast, making it hard to run into anyone. In any case, they have each other, and that's all they'll ever need. They'll continue to look after one another until they inevitably meet others. The kids nod, beaming as they promise to always look out for each other. Delighted, the trio set sail once more, continuing their endless journey deeper into the boundless sea. As they sail, we learn more about their life aboard the ship. Each has their duties. Poppy, the dad who never left to buy milk, handles hunting and maintenance, which might explain his fork obsession, though I'm still betting on a Poseidon Trident cosplay fetish. Bota is in charge of food and water. Lita handles laundry and cleaning. Dangerous tasks like ruin exploration are left to Poppy, but starting last year, he's been teaching Bota the ropes. He's shown him how to hunt near the surface and even brought him along on the safer ruin dives. That's how they've been surviving. Not ideal, but decent, considering the apocalypse. Ignoring the boredom of endless drifting, there are two things that get their hearts racing. First, the thrill of inspecting strange tools and trinkets scavenged from ruins. Second, a strict ironclad rule they must always follow. Never let nightfall catch you outside. As dusk falls and the sun begins to set, several alarms go off, warning the family of the incoming danger. They immediately drop everything and rush to the cabin. Realizing he forgot the fish, Bota tries to run back, but Poppy grabs him and shoves his head into the cabin, reminding him never to break the absolute rule. He follows them inside, slamming the door shut as the last of dusk disappears. An unnerving silence follows, broken only by the ticking of alarm clocks. The family huddles together, trying to use their bond to endure the deafening quiet. But as expected of an innocent kid, Lita breaks the silence, asking if she can hold the fish for comfort. The duo shush her sharply, warning her to stay silent. On the verge of tears, she's interrupted as the boat suddenly shakes, terrifying everyone. Acting fast, Poppy shields his kids, making sure no harm reaches them. It was also during this moment that we learned the real reason behind the absolute rule. The world was lost, no longer belonging to humans. It had been conquered by the creatures of the depths, mutated monsters that just so happened to be nocturnal. And nightfall is their hunting time. True to this fact, the monsters didn't hesitate to launch their assault. They rammed into the boat, shaking it and scaring the shit out of Bota and Lita. As the duo struggled to cope with the unnerving pressure and terror, a gentle arm wrapped around them, reassuring them in that troubling time. The arm was, of course, Poppy's. He smiled at them and told them not to worry. He would always protect them. As for the monsters, they shouldn't worry about them too much. They were only curious, rocking the boat a little before inevitably leaving. And so the three held each other, clinging to their bond until the monsters finally left. Sweeter still was the fact that Poppy never once let go of his kids through it all. Now that's a father right there. A true Poppy. Completely unlike your own, who went to buy milk and never came back. Damn. Fast forward a little later, and things were finally calm in their floating abode. Under the silent ticking of the clocks, the kids, exhausted and stressed from the encounter, were laid to rest by their diligent Poppy. Compelled by curiosity, Bota asked if Poppy's home had ever been attacked by sea monsters, because how else could he explain his knowledge and calmness during such a terrifying ordeal? Poppy replied that it had, but that was common on the vast sea. Since the entire world was covered in water and sea monsters lived everywhere, the same could be said for literally anywhere else. Still, it wasn't as scary as Bota imagined, because they had harpoonists. Hearing this strange new word, Bota perked up with interest. He asked what harpoonists were, some kind of noble maiden hunters? Maybe legendary huzz-whisperers? Poppy chuckled and replied that harpoonists were great warriors, not warriors of the cheeks, but of the streets. Well, technically the ocean, since the streets were now down under. Their duty was to slay sea monsters and protect their homes. Noticing Bota's growing excitement, Poppy revealed that he himself was one too, a mighty harpoonist, marked by the tattoo he bore, the true sign of his craft. Bota beamed in surprise and asked about the 6 strange dots under it. Poppy corrected him, saying they weren't dots but stars. Seeing Bota's confusion, he realized the kids had never seen the night sky before. They always hid indoors at dusk. Saddened by this, he decided to describe it. A black canvas with millions upon billions of bright jewels scattered across it. Beyond beautiful. He hoped his kids would see it one day. As he spoke, Bota finally succumbed to exhaustion and passed out. Poppy was left staring at them, love and nostalgia written on his face. Meanwhile, we get a clue about the world's current apocalypse. Something, or someone, had raptured the moon, shattering a huge chunk of that bastard into pieces. The next day, the extent of the monster's rampage finally became clear. Their week's worth of fish was gone, devoured whole. The boat was a wreck, ransacked and ravaged to near oblivion. Still, the family was alive, and that was what truly mattered to Poppy. Bota wasn't so convinced. He pointed at a strange mark on the deck. That didn't look like luck. It looked like a warning, as if the creature had claimed the territory. Poppy dismissed the thought. To him, it was just a week's worth of repairs and hard work, nothing more. Exploiting the moment, Bota asked if he could venture into the ruins to help, since Poppy would be busy with repairs anyway. But Poppy immediately shut that bullshit down. He sharply reprimanded him, telling him not to even think about it. The sea was full of monsters. What gave him the impression he'd allow something so risky? Bota shot back, pointing out the previous day's adventure. Hadn't Poppy let him join then? What was the difference between that and another dive? Poppy replied that he was mistaken. That hadn't been a casual dive. He had ensured things were safe beforehand before letting Bota into the water. Matter of fact, he didn't even know why they were arguing. He was the father, and his word was law. Staring sternly at his kids, he laid down a new rule. Both siblings were forbidden from ruin hunting until they were at least 17. Bota exploded at the absurdity. He yelled at his father, insisting he was old enough to do whatever he wanted. Poppy shot back that it was for his safety. Harsh, maybe, but it was what was best for him. Besides, the ban was only on ruins. He could take him anywhere else, whenever. Bota wasn't buying that gaslighting bullshit. What did Poppy mean wherever? They were on an endless ocean. There was nothing out there but water. They were trapped on this goddamn boat, just like a goldfish trapped in its jar. How could he call that living? Just as the two were about to square up for real, Lita called out, pointing at something. A flock of seagulls. That meant land nearby. Their squabble ended instantly as they chased after the birds, eventually finding a dilapidated building. Spotting fleeting shadows behind its windows, the kids got excited and called out, announcing their arrival to the entire structure. Poppy quickly shut them up and told them to hide. Grabbing his weapon, he instructed them to stay put while he checked it out. Before leaving, he gave Bota a final warning. If anything happened to him, he was to turn the boat around and leave. Confused, Bota asked if Poppy planned to fight the survivors. Poppy replied that it was possible, depending on how they reacted, whether they were good or evil. With that, he dove into the sea, swimming toward the ruin. After a few powerful backstrokes, he reached the building. Up close, it looked more daunting than he'd expected, but he wasn't a bitch, so he manned up and headed inside. Exploring the ruin, he found a partial staircase. Scaling the crumbling steps, he reached the first floor and a closed door. The silence was suffocating. He could hear his own heartbeat. But he pushed through the ominous feeling and opened the door. Behind it, corpses. Lots of them. His breath caught, and he staggered back in shock. Were these the survivors they'd hoped to find? If so, what killed them? Meanwhile, back on the boat, the kids were oblivious to the danger. They bantered, hopeful about meeting survivors, until Bota noticed a silhouette in the water. A man, drowning, calling for help. Naively, he rushed to rescue him. At the same time, inside the building, Poppy made another discovery. A box containing 2 antique explosives. Curious about where they came from and what they were meant for, he barely had time to wonder before spotting something else. A giant hole in the wall. The steel bars were bent inward. Something had attacked from the outside, forcing its way in. Worse, the deep scars on the walls were identical to the ones on their ship. Poppy froze, then bolted. His kids were in danger. He dove back into the sea, swimming furiously for the boat. When he arrived, he called out to Lita, asking where Bota was. The snitch didn't hold back. She spilled everything. Bota had gone to rescue someone. Poppy looked toward the survivor. One glance was enough to know the truth. This was a trap. That thing wasn't human. Realizing it had been exposed, the abomination fled underwater, leaving only faint ripples. Confused, Bota asked why it ran. Was it scared? Poppy replied that it wasn't scared, and it hadn't run. On the contrary, it was right below them. Terrified, he pulled his kids close, ready to use himself as a shield. Below the surface, the truth loomed. The monstrous sea demon had its sights on them. Without hesitation, it lunged, chomping the fishing boat straight out of the water. Its jaws clamped down on the hull, tearing through wood and metal alike. With a final wrench, it ripped the boat to pieces before turning its attention to the three on deck. It glared at them, etching its disturbing visage deep into their memories. Terrified, the family huddled together and screamed, "What the fuck was that?" That, my dear Bota and Poppy, is a jacked-up sea monster with some killer dental work. Dental work it used to easily smash their ship. Caught up in the onslaught, the family of three barely clung to each other to avoid being tossed overboard. But the monster wasn't satisfied. It slammed directly into the sea. The force sent the family reeling, and they narrowly avoided death by clinging to one half of the already destroyed ship. Unfortunately, that was as far as their luck could carry them. When they recovered from the relentless barrage, they were horrified to see a shadow zooming toward them. It was the lightning-fast tail of the sea monster, which whipped through the air and obliterated their last safe ground. The family was sent flying, crashing brutally into the dilapidated building. Unsatisfied with the carnage, the sea monster streaked through the waves, closed the distance, and relentlessly circled the building to press the attack. It left no room for the family to escape amidst its ruthless pursuit. Meanwhile, things weren't looking too good on their end. When he finally came to, Bota found the trio battered, bruised, and barely clinging to life at the edge of the crumbling structure. The only one in slightly better shape was their father, who still held them in his arms, protecting them despite the horrendous turn of events. Noticing the unconscious Lita, Bota panicked and asked if she was okay. Poppy replied that she was fine, just passed out from the shock. A little rest, and she'd be golden. Still, he was grateful they'd survived. He didn't know what he would have done if he'd lost them in that fight. Initially relieved they'd miraculously survived, Bota noticed something that made his skin crawl. His father wasn't doing as well as he claimed. In fact, his injuries were worse than theirs. A freaking metal rod had impaled him, likely because he'd dedicated everything to protecting them, completely disregarding his own safety. Panicked, Bota asked if there was anything he could do. Poppy was losing hella blood after all. Poppy brushed it off, insisting he'd be fine, that a little stab wasn't much. But the twitch in his lips betrayed the bravado. Still, now wasn't the time for bullshit. He told Bota to grab Lita and run. He would leave her in his care for a while. Bota wanted to argue, but Poppy silenced him quickly. Patting his son's head, he reassured him warmly. There was nothing to be afraid of. He'd be right behind them. Helpless, Bota grabbed Lita and ran, all while under his father's watchful eyes. Poppy watched them disappear into the distance before finally turning his attention to his own predicament. The rod lodged in his body. Like the true embodiment of "I'm him," Poppy ignored the devastating pain and pulled himself free. He lifted himself off the rod, enduring the agonizing, bone-deep pain. Halfway through, however, he noticed something that made his dire situation even worse. The monster was done fucking around and was coming in for seconds. It moved with lightning speed, appearing before Poppy in an instant. Donning the same creepy, twisted expression, the sea monster glared at him, its grimy, gigantic teeth inching closer. Its rancid breath washed over his face, overwhelming him with a foul stench. He wanted to close his eyes in disgust but forced them open, and noticed something peculiar. Despite being a creature of the depths, one clearly vulnerable to sunlight, it ignored the burning sensation and pursued them anyway. Why? What had they done, or stumbled upon, that made it so relentless? Something was clearly off. The sea monster ignored his jumble of thoughts and zeroed in on him, its focus shifting to the rod nailing him down. Sensing something amiss, Poppy reached for his sword, but was caught off guard by a twist. Instead of attacking him, the beast ignored him and turned toward Bota and Lita. Its intentions were clear: target the weaker ones first. Without hesitation, it whipped its tail toward the kids. The move was insanely fast, leaving Bota no room to dodge. Sensing the danger, he jumped forward, barely escaping the strike. Enraged, the sea monster dropped everything and commenced a frantic pursuit. It charged through the structure, drawing closer and closer to the fleeing Bota. As it did, it opened its maw wide, preparing to swallow him whole. Judging by the jagged rows of teeth lining its mouth, that would be a hell of a way to go. Predictably, Bota wanted no part of that smoke. He seized the first chance he got, sprinted up the stairs, and hurled himself into the building, narrowly escaping the closing maw. When it realized its second attack hadn't worked, the monster didn't relent. It launched a third. Through the gaps in the dilapidated building, it sent out a toothy tentacle, probing for its target. Bota, surprisingly quick on his feet, weaved through the strikes, always staying just out of reach. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. Lita stirred awake, and the noise drew the monster's attention. Bota immediately covered her mouth, but the damage was done. The tentacle closed in, following the sound. Without hesitation, it curled into a spike and shot forward, narrowly missing him. Bota could only endure for so long before being forced out of cover, frantically dodging and rolling to avoid certain death. Through a fortunate turn of events, he rolled into a narrow cranny, using it to withstand the attacks. Finally, the barrage ceased, leaving the room in an unnerving silence. Peering through the thick dust, Bota saw something that made his heart leap. It was his father, alive and well after pulling himself free from the impaling rod. Or so he thought. Turns out it was just an illusion, a nasty hunting camouflage deployed by the sea monster to lure him out. As soon as it confirmed his position, it dropped the act, uncurled like nightmare fuel, and reverted back to its disgusting tentacle form. Wrapping around Bota, it dragged him out of the building. He resisted, but his small body stood no chance against such a behemoth. The child was captured and delivered directly to the monster's waiting maw. Sensing death, Bota didn't play hero. He screamed desperately for his father. Of course, Poppy didn't disappoint. He ripped himself free, charged the monster, and slashed its tentacle apart, setting Bota loose. Grabbing hold of his son, he stabbed the monster's flank and slid down its body as crimson blood spurted in his wake. Landing, he hid Bota behind him, entered a fighting stance, and shouted at the monster to stop fucking around. How dare it go after his son? It would pay for that with its life. The monster said, "Bet," and stepped forward, towering menacingly over Poppy, pressing down with its overwhelming aura. Poppy didn't back down. He rose to the challenge, first instructing Bota to hide before turning his full focus to the beast. That's when he realized something he'd overlooked this whole time. This bastard sea monster was massive. Easily the biggest he'd ever seen. Maybe even bigger than Skutum, the sea devil he'd fought before. Nevertheless, retreat wasn't an option. Backing down meant his children would die, and that was something he refused to allow. Steeling his resolve, he unsheathed his sword and charged. Arriving before the behemoth, he dodged its swiping claw and slashed across its arm. Unsatisfied, he entered a frenzy, hacking relentlessly into its hide. Sword wounds bloomed like grotesque flowers, fountains of blood sputtering from the gashes. Frenzied by pain, the monster tried to slam him, but Poppy dodged, anticipating the counter. Exploiting the opening, he ran up its body, lunging for a devastating blow. Without hesitation, he drove his blade deep into its skull, then slid down its back, carving a nasty gash into its flesh. Finally, he disengaged, somersaulting away, careful not to push his luck. Unfortunately, his retreat wasn't fast enough. The monster's tail whipped him, hurling him into a nearby wall. The crash knocked the wind out of him, and he coughed up blood. Watching the carnage, Bota panicked and cried out for his father. Shit, what was he supposed to do? He had no ability to intervene in a fight of this magnitude, especially against a big-boned, love-handle-having behemoth of this caliber. Luckily, his intervention was unnecessary. Poppy had shit covered. His eyes darted and locked onto a dangling hoist line. Without a shred of hesitation, he seized it, slashed it free, and the recoil catapulted him skyward, just in time to dodge the sea monster's savage attack. Twisting midair with insane grace, he latched onto a colossal metal tube, wrapping around it like a cracked-up gymnast. The beast roared and lunged again, its maw gaping wide in a merciless follow-up strike. Realizing the danger he was in, Poppy opted for a desperate gamble. He pulled on the metal tube, yanking it free with considerable effort. Without pause, he leveled the tube at the sea monster and drove it forward, stabbing through its mouth in a sputter of blood and gore. Watching from the sideline, Bota instinctively flashed a triumphant smile. He was doing it. His father was actually clapping sea monster cheeks. He had no idea his old man was that formidable. Truly amazing. Meanwhile, the great battle against the sea monster raged on. It slammed into the nearby wall, hoping to shake Poppy off, but the man was like a clingy ex refusing to let go no matter what. Through considerable effort, luck, and perfect timing, Poppy tricked the sea beast into impaling its lower jaw. The wound forced its mouth open, preventing it from shutting, and giving Poppy the perfect opportunity to launch a relentless barrage. Of course, he didn't waste it. He immediately went to town, stabbing frenziedly, poking holes in every patch of flesh he could reach. Blood sputtered like rivers as the sea monster's wail bellowed, only to be drowned out by Poppy's war cry amidst the flood of gore. Just as things seemed to be going perfectly, tragedy struck. The metal tube snapped. Completely caught off guard, Poppy barely had time to react before the monster's jaws clamped shut on him, its teeth boring holes through his flesh. The sudden shift left him flabbergasted. He instinctively coughed up blood in horror, wondering what the hell had just happened. On the sidelines, Bota was equally terrified. Things had been going so well. So what the fuck just happened? He flicked a worried look toward his father, silently asking if he was okay. But Poppy returned only a regretful glance, his worry leagues above Bota's. Ever since they were little, he'd always been worrying about them. When Bota went on solo dives and took too long to resurface, Poppy's heart felt like it would pound out of his chest. Only he knew the fear and eventual relief that came with confirming their safety. During the nights, when sea monsters harassed them relentlessly, he always held them close, comforted them, and reassured them with a big smile. But the truth was, he had always been more terrified than they were. The fear of losing them, of not being able to protect them, scared the shit out of him. Nightmares haunted him constantly. Unfortunately, fate was a fickle mistress, and the bitch always came calling. Though reluctant, it was time to let them go. His lips parted in a resigned smile as he told Bota he loved them. He loved them very much. Without hesitation, he hurled his blade toward Bota and grabbed an explosive from his bag. Through clenched teeth, he uttered his last words, asking his son to take care of his sister. Then he detonated the explosive, obliterating both the monster and himself in a fiery blast. Caught in the aftermath, Bota was flung back by the shockwave, slamming hard into the wall. Meanwhile, the sea beast slowly sank, the gaping hole in its mouth proving just how dead it was. Before long, the depths reclaimed it, its corpse disappearing into the pitch-black darkness. Struggling to his feet, Bota shakily approached the churning sea. He wanted to believe his father had survived, but the bloody water left no room for doubt. Tears welled in his eyes as they landed on the last remnants of his father's sacrifice, his broken glasses. He couldn't deny it anymore. Poppy was truly gone, and they were now all alone. A hoarse, broken wail escaped his lips as he cried out for his father. We shift scenes to a dark and foggy night. Surprisingly, the fishing boat the family called home was still intact and afloat, untouched by the monster's rampage. On the deck stood a puzzled Bota, looking around urgently for his family. After some searching, his attention was drawn to sorrowful sobs. Following the sound, he found Lita crouched in a corner, crying into her arms. Concerned, Bota asked what was wrong and where their father was. Why was she hiding and sobbing so ominously? Lita didn't reply. Instead, she wordlessly pointed toward the ocean, toward a bloody corpse floating on the waves. Upon careful observation, Bota was horrified to realize it was his father's mangled body, torn apart in a tragic death. Panic overwhelmed him, and he made a beeline for the gunnels, ready to dive in. But Lita stopped him, begging him not to go, not to leave her behind. Furious, Bota wanted to shout at her, to reprimand her for stopping him. But his words froze in his throat at the horrifying sight before him. Lita was long dead. All that remained was a ghoulish creature that growled and glared back at him with hollow eyes. The sight scared the shit out of him, and he jolted awake. It had all been a nightmare. Quite some time had passed since the tragedy. It was already nighttime. Staring to the side, he found comfort in Lita's peaceful sleeping face. But the weight of reality crushed him once again. They were truly alone. Tears welled in his eyes as he thought about his father and how foolish he'd been. He had always argued with him, called him overprotective and nagging. But that had only been childish naivety. The truth was, his father had been protecting them every single day, against the sea, against the monsters, against everything. And now, he was gone. It was Bota's responsibility to protect his sister. Steeling himself, he held Lita close, just as Poppy had once done. Fast forward to the next morning. The kids' struggle for survival officially began. Luckily, things started relatively well. They found their small boat, still intact, with supplies stored inside. Delighted, Bota called out to his sister, telling her to stop lazing around and help him. But a quick glance showed the gloomy aura clinging to her. Lita didn't mince words. She asked directly, where was their father? Why wasn't he there? Had he died and gone to their mother? Taken aback, Bota didn't know how to respond. Should he tell her the truth? Was she even ready to hear it? Unsure, he simply hugged her, and they both cried into each other's arms. Eventually, the tears stopped, and the two got back to business, scavenging through supplies. When they found the alarm clock, Lita asked if they should keep it. Bota, however, had lost all faith in the damn thing. Since the monster had attacked them in broad daylight, the clock was useless. Best to toss it into the sea. Just then, Lita's stomach growled loudly, interrupting his rant. When he asked if she was hungry, she denied it. But the second, louder growl proved she was bullshitting. Embarrassed, Lita blushed and insisted she was fine. Bota reminded her she didn't need to pretend. They could just catch fish to eat. Rummaging through their supplies for something to use as a fishing rod, Bota realized their harpoon gun had been destroyed. He'd need a replacement. Just as he was about to move on to another box, the loud clatter of falling forks drew his attention. It reminded him of Poppy's words, that they'd come in handy someday. Well, the old man had been right. Wiping his tears, Bota manned the hell up and tied a fork to a rod, creating a makeshift harpoon. Not ideal, but it would do. When he headed for the water, the sea's dark, gloomy appearance made him pause. He had always been carefree, but recent events had left him traumatized. What if the monster was still alive? The once serene sea now looked terrifying. As he debated, Lita grabbed him desperately, begging him not to go. What if the monster came back? Seeing the fear in her eyes, Bota stepped back. Truth was, he was already scared, and now he had a legit reason to chicken out. Backing away, his eyes fell on a crab just chilling nearby. Fast forward. Poor Crab and his maiden were soon roasting over a campfire, their dinner for the night. When the food was ready, Bota gave everything to Lita, keeping nothing for himself. Confused, she asked why he wasn't eating. He claimed he wasn't hungry, but his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. Delighted and oblivious, Lita dug in, savoring every bite. Meanwhile, Bota was stressing the fuck out. Food was one thing, but they had no drinking water. He needed a plan. Fortunately, it rained that night, letting him collect some. But a sustainable solution was necessary. Then he remembered Poppy teaching him how to harvest drinking water from seawater. An idea struck. He set up a do-it-yourself experiment, evaporating seawater and collecting the condensation. Slow and torturous, but it worked. When the first drops of drinkable water slid into their container, the siblings rejoiced. At the very least, they wouldn't die of thirst. The thought greatly settled Bota, who'd been stressing the fuck out. At least with this, plus all the valuable knowledge he'd learned from Poppy, the duo finally had a decent chance of survival. He quickly perked up, ready to explore the whole building island. Since they were going to live there, possibly for the foreseeable future, it was paramount that he knew everything about it. Know thy neighbor and all that shit. Assuming thy neighbors weren't human-eating sea monsters, of course. Determined to be useful, Lita asked to tag along. Bota agreed, and the duo entered the building once again. Scaling the broken stairs, they eventually made it to the abandoned room on the first floor, the same room Poppy had explored earlier. Just like their father, the curious duo entered the room, and the sight greatly surprised them. Especially the rotting corpses on the floor, which, for some reason, looked way more ghastly and disturbing than before, making their faces turn ashen. Lita didn't hide her fear, and immediately clung to Bota for comfort. The older brother, though equally terrified, feigned composure to reassure his sister. Unfortunately, his trembling wasn't fooling anyone. The dude was scared as fuck. Calming his nerves, he told Lita not to worry about the corpses. They must have been the previous tenants of the building. For now, Their only priority was to scour the room and collect anything of value. Lita said bet, and although the corpses still scared her, she kept it hidden and helped Bota rummage through the room, discovering some dusty, worn-out blankets in the process. Meanwhile, Bota searched through the more dangerous-looking items. He eventually found a gas tank, which at first he confused for a water container. Thinking it stored drinkable water, he was quickly corrected by the strong smell and the amazing high he got from the fumes. Though reluctant, he sniffed the gas a couple more times before finally letting it go. Next, his eyes landed on a mysterious wooden crate on the ground. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a single explosive packed neatly inside. He soon identified it as the same kind of explosive Poppy had used to wipe out the sea monster in a fiery blast. Thinking about his father, Bota instinctively felt a sense of inadequacy. Would he ever be able to fight as gloriously as him? Clap sea monster cheeks as cleanly as him? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He had to give it his all. He had to protect his sister. If he didn't, their fates would be like the corpses lying in that room, dead and forgotten. Locking in, Bota officially began his preparations. First, he improved the makeshift harpoon before turning his sights on Poppy's sword. Since they'd be living there for a while, he would need the harpoon to catch fish, and the sword would be his best reassurance in case sea monsters attacked. Best believe he'd be ready for some cheek sauté the next time they did. Fiddling with the sword, he discovered an inconspicuous knob. Flicking it released a surging gas that unsheathed the blade and drove it forward. Before Bota could react, the surge intensified, yanking him forward relentlessly. He barely had time to process what was happening before he crashed brutally into a column, his nose bloody and mangled from the blow. Teasing, Lita asked if he was crying. Bota vehemently denied it, saying real men don't cry. Lita, however, replied that he wasn't a man then, because he was crying like a bitch right now. But that aside, he should follow her. She'd found something interesting. Hiding his embarrassment, Bota wiped his tears and obediently followed along, all the way to a rusted door on the floor. Puzzled, he asked why she'd brought him there. Wasn't that just a normal door? Upon careful observation, however, he discovered it was a hidden entrance into the basement. Curious, he decided to head down and check it out. After instructing Lita to stay put and keep watch, he grabbed his harpoon and made his way downstairs. Although initially confident, his bravery quickly waned as the pitch darkness slowly encroached. He couldn't help but wonder if it was truly wise to head into such an ominous place. Still, he'd already come that far, so turning back wasn't an option. Just as he was weighing his options, whether to risk it or say fuck it and leave, a huge fish jumped out of the water, surprising the hell out of him. Through careful observation, he realized that fish wasn't alone. A whole school of them had made the place their home. Delighted, he quickly jumped into the water and began his hunt. With fish so large and numerous, they wouldn't have to worry about food anymore. Plus, they had water, meaning they had everything they needed to survive. Extremely optimistic and cheerful, Bota continued his hunt, determined to catch as many fish as he could. He planned to have a feast that night to celebrate this unexpected windfall. However, just as Lady Luck seemed to be flashing our boy, giving him a tease of them stockings, tragedy suddenly struck. The water became ominously dark, and round, grotesque balls started appearing out of nowhere. Curious, and with zero survival instinct, Bota touched one to investigate. That was when the grim reality became apparent. The balls were actually monster eggs, and there were a shit ton of them everywhere. He had unknowingly entered a nest, and the worst had yet to emerge. The egg he'd touched suddenly shook, and cracks appeared on its surface. A hand jetted out, reaching for his neck. Terrified, Bota said fuck that and made a run for it. He swam with all his might, ignoring the unceasing hatching of monster eggs around him. Unfortunately, he hadn't fled far when a sea monster caught up to him, grabbing his leg. The little bastard didn't hesitate and immediately chomped down. Bota, clearly still in need of said leg, said hell no and struck first. He thrust the harpoon forward, stabbing deep into the monster's eye. Overwhelmed by the pain, the beast let go and flailed around like a bitch. Its reaction gave Bota the perfect opportunity to slip away. And slip he did. Soon, he left the gloomy waters behind, along with the monsters slumbering there. But he wasn't out of danger yet. In a show of true ferocity and loathing uncharacteristic of a mere beast, the sea monster glared at him, its thirst for revenge evident. Bota, however, didn't care. He just kept fleeing. When he emerged from the water, he instinctively heaved a sigh of relief, though his nerves were still on high alert. He planned to flee up the stairs, but a claw jetting from the water stopped him in his tracks. Before long, the monster clawed its way up and revealed its grotesque form. It was the same sea monster he'd stabbed, clearly furious, having spun the block to take revenge on his ass. Terrified, Bota scurried back, swinging his sword wildly to keep the monster at bay. But the beast ignored it and lunged forward, fangs bared to swallow him whole. Bota acted quickly, jumping to the side and avoiding an early reunion with Poppy. He didn't stick around to check its condition, just turned and ran as fast as he could. Soon, he made it to ground level and decisively shut the basement door. For added security, he even stomped on it, using his weight to press it down. Unfortunately, even that wasn't enough to deter the vengeful beast. It clawed at the door, tearing through it like a hot knife through butter. Seeing this, Bota yelled, "Watch this," and stabbed downward, plunging his sword into the door, and hopefully into the monster's flesh below. A sudden quiet blanketed the room, leaving Bota wondering. Had he actually done it? Had he taken down that hateful creature? He opted not to risk it and deployed extra measures. With effort, he gathered rubble and piled it on top of the door. Not entirely safe, but better than nothing. Gassed out, he suddenly remembered something he'd overlooked the entire time. Where the hell was Lita? Worried, he called for her, frantically searching through the building. But all he heard in return was deafening silence. Scared out of his wits, he bolted for the exit, hoping to God Lita was out there, safe and alive. He quickly exited the building, spotted Lita, and instinctively exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Luckily, she was safe, and that's all he cared about. Calling out, he warned her to stay away from the water, emphasizing that it wasn't safe. But Lita ignored him, still staring into the distance. Anxious, he moved closer and asked what was wrong. What was she looking at? Lita simply pointed to the sea and told him to look. Following her gaze, he spotted a silhouette off in the distance, eerily similar to the illusion the sea monster had shown. Terrified, Bota almost shit his pants. He knew it. That bastard wasn't dead. It had clearly come back for revenge. Come back to swallow them whole. Fuck. Before he could suppress his horror and figure out a suitable solution, Lita shocked him by jumping into the boat and swiftly paddling away. With an ecstatic expression, she told Bota that was their dad. He had finally come back for them. Clearly terrified and a little taken aback by Lita's childish naivety, Bota screamed for her to come back, warning that that wasn't their father. But before he could say more, the urgent ticking of the alarm clocks drew his attention, making his already pale face even paler. Just as they say, when it rains, it pours. Well, fate decided to bitch-slap Bota once again by adding an extra layer of difficulty to his already perilous situation. The alarm clocks rang, warning that dusk was approaching, and with the sunset came the harrowing monsters of the depths. Aware of this, Bota didn't hesitate to jump into the sea, desperately pursuing his runaway sister. He tore through the increasingly dark waters, ignoring the ominous ticking of the alarm clocks above him. However, there was one thing he couldn't ignore no matter what, and that was the sea monsters exiting their nests, finally awake in line with their nocturnal nature. Terrified, Bota watched the ugly, big-eyed, fanged, and low-key jacked up like Jim Bros sea monsters, unsure what to do next. He knew he wasn't a match for them, but was escape even possible at this point? Suppressing the unease in his heart, he decided to do the only thing he could for now, rescue his sister. Emerging from the water, he grabbed hold of the boat's line and pulled it towards an abandoned pillar. Though not entirely suitable to weather the incoming storm, it was better than facing the sea monsters in their watery domain. Besides, the island structure was too far away, and Bota was certain they wouldn't make it back in time. Helping Lita up, he was about to climb in as well when a sea monster targeted his legs. The vicious beast charged at him, its nasty fangs inches away from his feet. Sensing the danger, Bota swung himself upward, barely avoiding the sea monster's ghastly chomp. He hung on for dear life, enduring the dizzying shaking as the monster vented its missed opportunity. When it finally realized it wasn't going to capture its prey with such uncouth tactics, the sea beast reluctantly dove back into the sea. As for Bota, he was literally shitting his pants, especially when he noticed just how many of those vermin were gunning for them. Desperate, Bota racked his brain for a solution. The island structure was right there, but reaching it meant they had to dive into the sea. Even a lunatic would know that wasn't a good idea. The sea monsters would attack them the second they entered their territory. So, what should they do? Before he could mull it over, a sea monster attacked the structure, shaking it and almost flinging them into the sea. This undoubtedly drew Bota's attention as he discovered a grim reality. The building structure, the same sanctuary they were relying on to stay alive, was collapsing. The stony bastard wasn't going to last for long, and when it did collapse, well, the outcome was obvious. They'd be cooked. Despairing, Bota had thoughts of giving up. He was but a young boy. What could he possibly do in the face of such overwhelming foes? However, a quick thought of Poppy and the last task he left for him snapped him back to his senses. Their dad had given his life for them, bled for them. How dare he give up so easily? Was he a bitch or something? Nah, to hell with that. Even if he was going down, he'd definitely bring down one of those bastards with him. Energized by his resolve, he wielded his blade against a lunging sea beast, his arms swinging in resolute defiance. He slashed down, activating the gas propellant, and cleanly sliced a sea beast in half. The monster collapsed in a flood of blood and sickly gore, dyeing the sea crimson. Whereas Bota, the Reaper of Life, stood frozen, disbelieving of his glorious feat. Before he could dwell on it, however, two more sea beasts lunged at him, successfully executing a sneak attack. Luckily, Bota acted fast, swinging his sword in a counterattack. He clipped one sea monster, causing it to crash into the other in a double strike. Unfortunately, the glorious feat also caused the structure to crumble, leaving them tumbling down straight towards the murky sea. Reacting quickly, Bota grabbed hold of Lita, braced himself, and decisively jumped from the structure. He abandoned the crumbling pillar, soared through the air, and accurately landed onto their tiny boat. Just as he was about to heave a soft sigh from escaping their first predicament, a sputter of blood suddenly splashed, drawing their attention. The blood was from the other sea monsters, who had discovered their fallen kin and were viciously cannibalizing it. Though the sight was repulsive and straight-up disgusting, Bota couldn't help but be glad about the monster's savage nature. At least this way, they'd have enough time to escape. Snapping Lita out of her traumatized trance, he told her to paddle. They'd use this opportunity to slip away. Lita said bet, swallowed that spinach like Popeye, and immediately let them guns fly. The duo paddled like crazy, breaths ragged as they slowly inched away from the feasting sea monsters. Unfortunately, the beasts quickly noticed their escape and gave chase. They pursued the kids relentlessly, narrowing the gap between them in an instant. Realizing this, Bota put more back into it and soon reached the island structure. He didn't dally by the sea. Instead, he grabbed Lita and jetted into the building. Upon arriving, their next hurdle soon became apparent. They had to climb a flight of sketchy stairs, all while being pursued by a nest of hungry sea monsters. Despite this, Bota grit his teeth and pushed Lita onto the first step. He told her to keep moving. He would find a way to cover her retreat. Saying so, he raised his sword and slashed it at the steps. His aim was to sever them and block the sea monster's pursuit. But he'd gravely underestimated the thickness of the steps. They weren't things he could break in a short time, especially with a nest of sea beasts after him. Nevertheless, Bota ignored the odds and kept hacking. His relentless attacks drew the monster's attention, and they quickly closed in on him. Bota, on the other hand, didn't relent and desperately kept slashing. He unleashed all his pent-up frustration on the steps, hacking at them like a deranged psycho. Regrettably, despite his best efforts, he wasn't quick enough to finish before the sea beasts caught up to him. The little bastards clawed at him, forcing Bota to retreat in a frenzy. Meanwhile, the sea monsters weren't the types to give up easily. They pursued Bota up the stairs, their Herculean bodies hanging from the steps. Finally, in a stroke of genuine bad luck, Bota tripped and fell, opening himself up for an attack from behind. The blow cut deep, sputtering blood and causing Bota to scream in agony. He wanted to turn back and counterattack, but that became unnecessary when the steps finally gave way, crumbling with a resounding crack. The unexpected change caught the sea monsters off guard, and all of them tumbled to the ground, helpless as they glared at the kids, just inches from their reach. Meanwhile, Bota and Lita finally let out the turbid breath they'd been holding in. At least for now, they seemed to be safe, although the sea monsters' relentless pursuit still sent a shiver down their spines. Waiting and observing no unfavorable changes, Bota finally exclaimed in joy. They'd made it. They'd escaped those damned bastards. Lita, however, was more concerned about his back. That wound looked hella deep after all. Bota told her not to worry about it. Such a tiny scratch couldn't do shit to him. For now, they should head inside and wait for the sun to rise. He moved to lead Lita into their temporary camp, only to halt at the sight before him. A towering sea monster had been lying in ambush, waiting for them to fall into its trap. Worst part? It was the same vindictive bastard from before. Wasting no time, the sea beast attacked, pinning Bota to the ground. It then chomped at him, its nasty fangs inching toward his head. Bota screamed in panic and held on, barely keeping the sharp fangs from sinking into him. But judging by the trembling in his arms and the growing despair in his gaze, it was obvious he couldn't hold on for long. Just as things were getting desperate, Lita jumped in, stabbing the sea monster in the eye. She stepped back trembling, her hands bloody as she told the beast to let go of her brother. Enraged, the sea monster lashed out, clawing at her with fury. Luckily, it was blind, so its attacks fell short of reaching the terrified child. Bota, however, wasn't as lucky, as he got clipped by a stray strike. The blow sent him flying, whining and screaming like a bitch. With one obstacle out of its way, the sea monster turned its focus to Lita. Since its sight was getting blurrier by the second, it decided to use a different method to locate the troublesome kid who blinded it. Sniffing the air, it locked onto Lita's scent and followed the smell to the wall. Its jagged fangs opened with a menacing growl as it slowly closed in on her. Meanwhile, the little girl was trapped and terrified, helpless to stop her demise. She called out to her brother, begging him to save her. Bota, being the reliable brother he was, didn't disappoint. He smacked the gas tank, drawing the sea monster's attention. When that wasn't enough, he spanked that bastard even harder, finally forcing the beast to ignore Lita and charge at him. Having predicted this, Bota met the sea monster head-on. He hurled the gas tank into its mouth before dodging to the side in a narrow escape. Caught off guard by the insidious counterattack, the sea monster chugged down the fuel before it could even process the mess it had gotten itself into. Of course, Bota wasn't going to let that opportunity slip by. He quickly recovered, grabbed his sword, and faced off against the idiotic sea monster, which was still dousing itself in gas. Without mercy or hesitation, he swung his sword, yelling for the beast to die. The blade sliced through rubble and metal rods, producing sparks that flew toward the soaked sea monster. Flames unfurled like blossoms, and the once mighty creature was set ablaze, its agonized shriek thundering across the room. Satisfied with the outcome, Bota grabbed Lita and made a run for it. He dashed toward a ladder, aiming to escape the fire by climbing to the roof. However, halfway through the climb, the flames became the least of Bota's worries. In a genuine stroke of bad luck, the sea beast knocked over the explosives during its death throes. The payload went flying before landing ominously amid a sea of fire. Noticing this, Bota said, "Hell no," and checked out early. He scaled the ladder in an instant, reuniting with Lita at the top. Once there, he shouted at her to get down, warning that the building was about to explode. With no time to explain, he scooped up the confused Lita and braced for the inevitable impact. A thunderous explosion erupted below, engulfing everything in its path. The whole building was blown apart from the inside, dust and debris flying everywhere. Meanwhile, Bota and Lita hadn't escaped unscathed. The shockwave flung them around, their feeble forms bouncing like rag dolls as the structure collapsed. Before long, the entire building came down, crushing the group of sea monsters prowling on the ground floor. As for the kids, they were hurled into the sea, a rain of wreckage and debris accompanying their fall. The duo was dragged deep into the water, all the way to the sea monster's nest. The scene there wasn't much different from the carnage above. The whole place was collapsing, with enormous rubble laying waste to the nest. It quickly became a scene of blood and gore, as countless sea monster eggs met a tragic end. Ignoring all this, Bota grabbed Lita and swam for the surface. He would have loved to rejoice at the monster's fate, but survival held more significance. Still, he let out a relieved sigh when they finally broke the surface. They now had one less thing to worry about. Taking in the ruined surroundings, Bota inexplicably wondered what to do next. The island structure was destroyed, leaving them homeless for the time being. He wanted to curse their luck, but an ominous growl from behind choked the words in his throat. Turning around, he was horrified to find a sea beast glaring at him, and not just one, but a whole group of them. Fangs bared, growls rumbling in deep, guttural tones. More and more emerged from the water until the siblings were completely surrounded. Terrified, they barely had enough time to scream before the monsters lunged. Determined to protect his sister, Bota stepped forward, sword swinging in desperate slashes. He tried his best to fend them off, but their overwhelming numbers were too much. Soon he was swarmed, the sword nearly ripped from his grip. Desperate, Bota yelled for the sea beast to stay back while shielding Lita beside him. No matter what, he would do his best to protect her. When the idea of dying entered his mind, tears welled in his eyes. He wasn't willing. He really didn't want to die, especially not in such a gruesome way. But what could he do? Weakness was a sin after all. Just as his despair reached its peak and all paths seemed blocked, a projectile shot through the air, annihilating a sea monster instantly. Confused, the siblings turned in the direction of the throw, and what they saw greatly surprised them. It was a mommy. And not just any mommy, but a badass one straight out of Kick-Ass Academy. Her eyes were glued to them, her expression one of complete indifference. Seeing this, Bota couldn't help but wonder, who was this auntie with the huge boobies? And why was she going around blessing guys with such glorious, glossy cheeks? Goddamn. The sea monsters, however, weren't too happy about the new arrival. They shifted their fury toward her, fangs bared in silent warning. Then, as if on cue, they all charged, climbing over each other to reach the new prey first. The mysterious lady didn't panic. She reached for her Uzi, cocked that bad boy, and aimed at the lunging foes. Without hesitation, she opened fire, raining a hail of projectiles at the sea monsters. The barrage also struck near the siblings' boat, clipping the sea beast gunning for them. Unfortunately, they too were in danger of being hit, forcing Bota to shield Lita as they endured the barrage. Halfway through cursing the maiden for her reckless attack, Bota finally realized what the projectiles were. Harpoons. The crazy, busty auntie was using a freaking nail gun to wreak havoc. Absurd, yes. But the dying shrieks of the sea monsters told a different tale. This glossy-cheeked maiden meant business. Realizing their direct charge was only leading to slaughter, the sea monsters wised up and dove into the water, continuing their attack from below, using the darkness to mask their movements. Meanwhile, the siblings could only marvel at the sight. Who would have thought the monsters that had caused them so much dread would be mowed down like weeds? Surreal didn't even begin to cover it. Before they could dwell on it, a distinct creak alerted them to an enemy nearby. The duo barely had time to turn before a sea beast lunged, teeth bared. Acting quickly, Bota grabbed Lita and jumped aside, narrowly avoiding the sneak attack. Reaching for his sword, he slashed, drawing blood with the first strike. But the puny damage wasn't enough to deter the beast. It grabbed hold of the sword, trapping Bota before rearing back for a nasty claw strike. Terrified, Bota screamed, his life flashing before his eyes. But just as he was about to be diced into pieces, the lady intervened, peppering the sea monster with hot ones. The attack proved fatal, downing the beast instantly. Shocked, Bota flicked his gaze to the lady, only to find her surrounded by corpses. In that short span of time, she'd annihilated everything around her, and even had the leisure to rescue him. Shifting to offense again, she pressed the attack but soon realized her clip was empty. Unfazed, she ejected the magazine and reached for a new one. But the sea beasts weren't dumb enough to give her that chance. They launched a sneak attack, smacking the gun from her hand. Watching the weapon sink, the lady sighed and glanced at her arm. The damned bastards had managed to land a hit, an act she found completely unacceptable. Seething with rage, she ignored the charging monsters and drew her blades. The lethal weapons unsheathed with a sharp shing, their forms brutal and barbaric. Stomping on the accelerator, the lady surfed across the water, straight at the sea monsters, and straight into my dreams tonight, goddamn. Then, With savagery unbecoming of someone so cheeked up, she swung her blade, decapitating a sea beast in a single slash. Pressing the attack, she parkoured off the next beast while slicing its head clean off. Twisting midair, she spun just in time to meet the next lunging foe. Without hesitation, she performed a cyclone strike, dicing through her prey before distancing herself from the chaos. What followed was a scene of gore. The sea monster split into thirds, its innards painting the ocean crimson. Meanwhile, the maiden didn't even spare it a second glance. She streaked through the water, eyes already locked on her next prey.